Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with monkey bread. That's right, this holiday-themed monkey bread is studded with just the right amount of cranberry and walnut, and it is so delicious and addictive. It will turn the most civilized group into a troupe of very unruly simians. Oh yeah, everybody thinks they have good table manners until they're around monkey bread. And to get started, we'll put together a very easy-to-make dough, which begins with some warm milk. Right, something about 105 degrees would be perfect. And then what we'll do is sprinkle over 1 packet of dry active yeast, and we will let that sit and bloom for about 10 to 15 minutes before we add in the rest of our ingredients, which, because this is a sweet dough, will include some sugar, although not as much as most recipes, and you'll see why later. We'll also need a generous amount of melted butter, which, by the way, makes this dough very easy to work with, and then we'll follow that with 1 beaten egg. And then we'll finish up with some all-purpose flour, as well as some salt, of course. And that's it. Once everything's together, we'll place that on our stand mixer, and we'll use the dough hook attachment to start kneading this on the second speed. But once it all comes together, for this dough I like to reduce it down to the first speed, since it seems to knead a little bit better at the slower setting. But that kind of thing depends on the type of dough and the amount of dough, so you put that on whatever setting you think is going to get the job done. And what we'll do is knead that for about 5 to 7 minutes, or until our dough is beautifully smooth and fairly elastic. And yes, you can do this by hand, but you're going to have to knead it probably about 10 to 12 minutes. And then once we feel like that's kneaded enough, we will stop and add our chopped walnuts and dried cranberries. And we'll turn our mixer back on and knead that for another minute or two, or until everything's been evenly distributed. Whoops, don't forget to lock the arm. There we go. Oh, and hold on for a second. We have a couple rogue cranberries on top of the dough hook. So let me go ahead and brush those off, since watching those on top would bother a lot of people, like me. And that's it. Once our nuts and fruits are mixed in, we will stop and take this off the mixer. And I'm going to go ahead and transfer that onto the work surface, so you can get a better look at this gorgeous texture, which is very soft and kind of sticky, but thanks to the butter, not the kind of stickiness that actually sticks to your fingers. So this really is a very pleasant dough to work with. And what we'll do is transfer that back into a lightly buttered bowl. And yes, I'm just going to use the same bowl I mixed it in. And what we'll do is cover that and let it rise until it's just about doubled, which is probably going to take about an hour and a half or so. And while we're waiting, we can mix up our cinnamon sugar, which is done by mixing cinnamon in sugar. And we'll be using the classic age-old ratio of 1 cup of sugar to 1 tablespoon of cinnamon. And once we have that mixed up, we'll set it aside until we need it. And we'll head back over and check our dough, which, like I said, should just about double. And we can test it by poking it with our fingers. And if the dough springs back, it's not ready yet. But that looked and felt perfect. So what we'll do at this point is grease our work surface with a little bit of butter. And we will transfer our dough on top. And then attempt to press and stretch it out into a square that's roughly 15 by 15 inches. Although the exact size really does not matter. As long as you end up with some kind of square and the dough's been pressed out into an even layer, it is going to work great for the next step. Since the only reason we're bothering with a square is so we can cut this into 64 relatively even pieces. But before we get to that step, let's go ahead and brush the surface with some melted butter, or in my case softened butter, which was melted, but my kitchen's freezing, so it's sort of solidified. But that's fine, as long as you can spread it over, it's going to work. And then once the top is buttered, we'll take a pizza cutter, and we will cut this into 8 columns by 8 rows to give us 64 pieces. And no, they do not all have to be exactly the same size, which is a good thing, because that would be impossible. And then, as the old saying goes, before you can make monkey bread, you gotta make monkey balls. So what we'll do is take each portion of dough and quickly roll it into a ball, and then we'll grab our cinnamon sugar and toss it in that, since we want every one of these pieces of dough to be thoroughly coated with the cinnamon sugar before it goes into our pan. And of course, we can do 5 or 6 or 7 at a time. And once those are set, we will carefully transfer them into a very, very generously buttered bundt pan. Or really any pan that fits this amount of dough will work. But the bundt pan does make for a very nice presentation. And we can be a little bit careful on that first circle that goes along the bottom. But once the bottom's covered, we can pretty much just put these in randomly, being careful not to press and smash the dough too much. All right, as you'll see, once this proofs, All those balls of dough are going to kind of puff up and push into each other. So we do not want things firmly packed at this point. And once our bun pan's been monkey balled, we'll go ahead and cover that back up. And we will let this proof for about 30 to 35 minutes. And while we're waiting, we can make our butter and sugar mixture that we're going to pour on the top before we bake this. And we'll do that by melting a touch of butter over medium heat. And once it's almost melted, we'll toss in our brown sugar. And we will give it a stir. And we'll wait for the mixture to just start bubbling. Oh, and don't be nervous. This is one of those things that does not look good until it does. So just leave it on medium, stirring occasionally until you see it start to bubble, at which point we'll turn off the heat. And if we're using it, we'll toss in a little bit of orange zest, which I think pairs beautifully with these other flavors. And with the heat off, we will keep whisking until we form what looks like a very nice smooth caramel sauce. And by the way, even though I didn't use his recipe for monkey bread, I did borrow this mixture from my good friend who I've never met, John Cannell from Preppy Kitchen. So if you run into him, tell him I said thanks. And that's it. Once our sauce is set, we'll go back and check our pan, which after about 35 minutes should look like this. And then what we'll do is take that mixture we just made and pour it evenly over the top, attempting to coat each and every ball on the surface. But that's not where that sugar butter mixture is going to stay. Right, as this bakes, it's going to kind of seep down in and coat everything with its sweet buttery goodness, which is why I do not like to put too much sugar in the dough. And that's it. Once that's been applied, this is ready to transfer into the center of a 350-degree oven for about 35 to 40 minutes, or until it's fully puffed up and the top is lightly browned, and it looks like this. Oh yes, that is amazing looking. And that part's the bottom we're not even going to see. And then what we need to do here is let this rest for exactly 10 minutes, during which time it's going to kind of sink down into the pan a little bit. And after 10 minutes, we'll put a plate over the top, and we will carefully turn it over. And if you're lucky, it's going to fall right out, like mine did. But if it doesn't, just give it a few taps and it will come out. And we'll carefully remove the pan to reveal one of the most beautiful and interesting sights in all of baking. And then we should really let this cool down until it's just barely warm or room temp before we eat it. But as usual, that's going to be up to you. I mean, you are, after all, the curious George of when to gorge. And I usually always let these kind of things cool, but this time I could not. I went full monkey and pulled a piece right off, which yes, kind of burned my fingers, but it was totally worth it. Since that, my friends, truly was amazing. And because we did not add a ton of sugar to the dough, for me this has the perfect level of sweetness. And even though they're optional, and you don't have to put them in at all, those little bits of walnut and jewels of cranberry, I think really do elevate this and make it much more holiday appropriate. And if you do put this out on the table, whether it's breakfast or brunch or after dinner for dessert, at a Thanksgiving gathering or Christmas or something like that, as I touched on in the intro, you will fully understand how this got the name monkey bread. Although some people think it was named after a puzzle, but that explanation is not as fun. But anyway, no matter how this got its name, it is a delicious, highly addictive, fairly easy and gorgeous recipe, and I really do hope you give it a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always,